Kia ora tātou, nau mai, haere mai. Warm welcome to our Council meeting for Wednesday the 5th of April 2023. Before we get through to our order of business, invite Councillor Fitzgerald to open our meeting with karakia.
Morena koutou e te whare. Ka tīmata tō tātou nei karakia mo te ata nei. Tū taua mai i runga, tū taua mai i raro. Tū taua mai i roto, tū taua mai i waho. Kia tau ai te mauri tū, te mauri ora, ki te katoa, haumi e, hui e, tāke. Mr. Mayor, thank you.
Kia ora, thank you. Colleagues and members of the public, this meeting is being recorded and it's being live streamed on our Council's YouTube channel. Just in terms of health and safety, because we have a few members of the public here, and welcome. In the unlikely event of an emergency, we will exit the building via the green signs, and the assembly area is the clock tower in the square Te Maraeohine. In terms of health and safety, it's a non-smoking facility. Our toilets are located in the link span as you came in. A defibrillator is located at the front of house on the ground floor. And any incidences, please speak to our committee administrators. Right, we have Councillor online, Councillor Mickelard, welcome. And if I could just ask speakers and officers just to say their name and title before they speak, please. Right, we'll go through to our first agenda item. Apologies. I don't have any apologies. We're all here. Welcome. Notifications of additional items. Again, there is none. Declarations of interest. I haven't been notified. Councillor Johnson.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I need to declare an interest in one of the points in item 16, as my husband is an archery coach, so I'll ask for that archery club clause to be taken separately, please.
Thank you. Noted. Public comment. Now, we do have some public comment this morning, and I welcome two members of the public. First, we have Walter Davis. So, Walter, welcome, and you'd like to speak on your small presentation. And Walter, yeah, just the button there.
Thank you, Mayor, and good morning all. So I'm here today to speak about the new cultural and civic precinct, which is coming before the council. So I've been following this project ever since the 10-year plan was done last year, 2 years ago, and the scale of investment came to my attention. With the scale of money allocated to these city assets in the 10-year plan, we need to ensure we're investing this as smart and strategically as possible. We need to think 40 years ahead of now, when the population of Palmerston North is 250,000. Will the citizens of this city be proud of the vision that the Council of 2023 set? The seismic ratings of several buildings, in particular the library and Te Manawa, mean we have to act. So why not use this opportunity to propel our city forward and become even better set up for the next generation? So the four key areas I'd like to discuss are the following. Is the land use for the civic and cultural precinct, or the footprint, a fresh look at what the key facilities are, including possibly some combined facilities, combined buildings, new attractions that we can incorporate, and scope for public-private partnerships. Sorry, how do I go to the next slide? Let's push here. Oh, here we are. Now it's working. Thank you. So regarding land selection, like all of yourselves, I've seen the draft cultural precinct master plan options, and the main criticism I'd venture to make is that it seems to have been created very much using the current footprint as the starting point. And there's a lot of buildings packed quite tightly into the existing block. So while the current land footprint is an option, I think part of the master plan should include consideration of what other land that could potentially be incorporated. Thank you. So options to consider could be extending the current cultural precinct footprint to include the railway land. So I know there is real sentiment in our city to maintain green space, and I do support this. What I would suggest, though, is a fresh view of where the green space could be. One option could be shifting Te Manawa further out, possibly to the railway land, to make way for more green space in the current area. This would provide space to host festivals, events, circuses, closer to our city centre and near our cafeteria area and retail area, and nearer to the connectivity locations like the bus terminal. Another key strategic view we can take is what buildings are combined and what remains separate. For example, on the screen is what a new combined library and Te Manawa Centre could look like if built on the current railway land, for example. Instead of spending $60 million seismic strengthening the library and a further $50 million on Te Manawa, we could build a beautiful new facility like this. So an 11,500 square metre facility at 8,000, rule of thumb, $8,000 per square metre would cost $92 million, making us $18 million further ahead than the initial budget for the seismic strengthening. The library building could then be rebuilt behind the facade into something such as a hotel, retained or possibly sold. So even if the cost of rebuilding was as much as the proceeds from its sale, we would still have a brand new library and museum, plus be $18 million further ahead. My third point is using the Cultural Precinct Master Plan to provide more attractions and entertainment for both youth and tourists. The Master Plan is the best opportunity for a generation to inject creativity into our key city assets. Currently we have few indoor playgrounds for rainy days. Te Manawa isn't all that engaging, and in all honesty the library doesn't really live up to its slogan, the living room of the city. Unfortunately the downtown complex has instead been the living room of the city for some. With a fresh start and fresh thinking, we can create more exciting modern spaces. An upgraded museum could include things like an Internet of Things learning suite, maybe an indoor skate area, basketball courts, or for those that are more digitally driven, they could head upstairs to New Zealand's largest gaming room. These are a few of the ideas we could realise with a fresh start. This idea here is something we could look at for evening entertainment. This is on the screen now. You're looking at the Merchandise Mart building in Chicago. I was there last year and actually last week also. And what they do every night, they beam a light show onto the Merchandise Mart building. It's called Art of the Mart. And people come and sit in the cafeteria district and watch it every evening. Provides a nightly entertainment. So this idea is something we could steal and incorporate into our cultural precinct, adding a nighttime vibe to our city and keeping tourists in town for that additional night. Lastly, I believe the scope of the cultural precinct consultation process should consider scope for public-private partnerships. In particular, this model could be employed for the convention centre and hotel. By engaging the private sector, or iwi such as Rangatane, there is much more scope for our city to gain a large, flashy convention centre without encumbering local rate players with the financial burden. A good example of this is the Melbourne Exhibition Centre. Our business will actually be exhibiting there next month at the Australian Manufacturing Week. If any councillors want to come by and say hello, we'd be glad to see you at C26. In summary, I'd like to just give full support to you in taking this opportunity to give our city a big boost in profile. There's no doubt hundreds of ideas in the community, so I'd commend to you today to open this project up for consultation and maybe set a steering committee to explore the many options there are for this precinct. Thank you.
Thanks, Walter. Food for thought. Thank you. A couple of questions. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Walter, for coming in and presenting this to us. My concern remains sort of what we discussed in the election campaign is what we would do with the library building in its stead. You know, I understand your idea for Te Manawa would be to build a green space, but what do you see happening with the existing library, given it took us many years to get Safari to invest in high flyers? I don't think those kind of partnerships sort of exist on a regular basis. What would we do if we couldn't get a public-private partnership for that old building? Yeah,
so obviously retaining the facade is a key heritage aspect of the city, which we've got to respect. I think, so I'm not a construction person, but I think exploring, doing a feasibility analysis on rebuilding behind the facade into a hotel is one option I thought of, but there may be other options. I think, well, obviously, there's got to be effort put into that. My key point is really to explore the options. We don't want to just stay with the old library for the next 300 years because we don't know what else to do with it. I think we've got to really challenge the norm there. That's my key point. I don't know the options. My key point is just to challenge them.
And would you see that as being something council would do or something we would sell and allow a private developer to do?
Well, your point about Safari Group taking a long time is I understand that, but I would have thought that building may be able to be sold while retaining heritage status on the facade. Option, I don't know.
Thank you.
Thanks, Walter. That's great. Thank you. We appreciate your input and presentation to us. That's our questions done. Thank you. All right. All right, councillors, we just need to resolve that the public comment be received for information. I'm happy to move that. Seconded by the Deputy Mayor. No comments. Right, we will vote on that, please. And it's passed 16 votes for. Thank you. Okay, we now to just part 1 first. We'll take out part 2, confidential. Do that in a separate resolution, but again, I'm happy to move part 1, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Are there any matters arising? There being none, we will vote. That's passed 16 votes for, none against. Thank you. We will now go to the part 2. Right, we're looking now at resolving the minutes of the council meeting 15th of March 23. Part 2, confidential, will be confirmed as a true and correct record. If we just have that once, I think it's there twice. Okay, so now this is the part 2 confidential minutes, which we will vote on. So again, moved by myself, second by the Deputy Mayor. Any matters arising from part 2? Hope there isn't. Okay, right, we will vote. And that has passed 14 votes for and 2 against.
2 abstentions.
Sorry, 2 abstentions. Right, we're going to move through to number 8 on our order paper, and this is around the, and it's been moved from our 1st of March meeting. This is around consideration on options around the Civic and Cultural Precinct Master Plan. And that is, I'm just trying to think where it is. It's actually in an older report.
Yeah.
1st of March, page 39. And invite officers to speak. David.
Morena koutou, David Murphy, Chief Planning Officer, and I have with me Jono Ferguson-Pye, City Planning Manager. We'll take the report from the 1st of March order paper as read. I'll just briefly summarise the three options and particularly what they mean in terms of any work officers would be doing or consultants would be doing between now and the next LTP and what the three options would mean in terms of the next LTP. So the first option is to simply strengthen the buildings. So there would be no further work on a civic and cultural precinct master plan. So there'd be no work completed to advance either the 2019 or 2022 civic and cultural precinct master plan. Effectively, what council would do is work towards strengthening the existing buildings within the civic and cultural precinct master plan. Option 2 is to complete the work undertaken during the course of 2021 and 2022 on the civic and cultural precinct master plan with the budget that is in the current annual budget. So that would mean appointing a new consultant to complete that work between now and the end of June, which is, I guess, potentially unrealistic in the timeframes that are left. Option 3, which is the recommended option, is between now and the next LTP. Officers would prepare a suite of programs to advance the 2019 master plan that was reported to council. Those programs would go into the LTP and there would be consultation as part of the LTP about that option alongside the other options. So in effect, if council adopted the recommendations, in effect what they are doing is delaying the more substantive decision about the future of the civic and cultural precinct master plan and an expenditure on that to the LTP, where there can be consultation with the community about completing the civic and cultural precinct work versus potentially option 1, which would be to simply strengthen the buildings. So I guess in summary, in terms of what that means for officer and consultant time, option 1, there would be no, as I said, no further officer or consultant time on the civic and cultural precinct master plan. Option 2, as I said, if that was adopted, it seems unlikely given the content of the report. That would involve appointing a consultant to complete the work between now and the end of June. Option 3 would be no consultants, but officers would prepare a series of programs for consideration as part of the LTP. So happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, David. So in terms of what the recommendations are to us, and obviously the report has been read, the lengthy report, that option 3 is the recommendation that officers are proposing because it still keeps, how would I frame it, it still keeps the project moving but with a more internal focus rather than the external focus which we've attempted. Is that right?
That's correct. So the recommendation is option 3. So effectively the next sort of 12 months would look like officers working with a steering group established to develop a set of programs to advance the 2019 work. But importantly, those set of programs and the work that would flow from that would be consulted as part of the LTP. So there would be an opportunity for council and the community to consider I guess the benefits and costs of advancing that civic and cultural precinct master plan against other issues that the city may be facing.
And just on, and that makes all sense, thank you. Just on number 5, and correct me, repurposing of program 1949 to assist with urban growth district plan program. Is that a physical, is there money in that program?
There's operational expenditure within program 1949, so that was money within this financial year to complete the civic and cultural precinct master plan. However, we ceased our contract with the consultant in about October and November last year. So there's been very little or no expenditure of program 1949, which is $220,000. So what we're saying is if you accepted the recommendations and went with option 3, program 1949 is currently unspent. And we've talked in the chamber a number of times about some of the challenges facing the urban growth work. So in terms of rezoning the likes of Kakatanga and Kotiri. So if you went with option 3, there would be the option for the council to repurpose program 1494 to assist with that urban growth work. But that's not necessarily linked to option 3. If you chose option 3, but you preferred to just put that money into savings, then that's an option.
Okay, all right, that explains that well, thank you. I think everyone wants to speak. Okay, Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have a few questions, so stop me if you need to move me on. First, I wondered if I could seek a comment on the presentation from Mr Davis. How would those kind of ideas be best incorporated into consideration of future work?
Yeah, that's the first time I've seen or heard from Walter or his ideas. So certainly part of that program of works that we would develop with that for consideration as part of the LTP is what we're suggesting is there would be a longer process for the development of the Civic and Cultural Precinct Master Plan. I think one of the lessons from both the 2019 and 2022 pieces of work is trying to deliver a project of that scale in terms of its impact on the city and the cost to the community, as it would be more of a series of pieces of work over a number of years where we're building up the evidence in the case for the master plan. So that would involve the opportunity to engage with the likes of Walter and others to better understand how those could be incorporated within the work.
Thank you. And I suppose my next area of questioning is about kind of the difference between option 3 and option 1. Now, my read of the paper was option 3 doesn't necessarily mean do everything, that there's some wiggle room in that. Is that correct?
Yeah, option 1 is effectively what I call not spiralling out in any way, shape or form. So you would effectively just work towards strengthening those buildings as they exist where they are at the moment for their current purpose. Option 3, in terms of spiralling out and thinking about what we're trying to achieve, that work may well result in a decision to simply strengthen some parts of the buildings or some buildings within the Civic and Cultural Precinct Master Plan. So there's no, I guess option 3 doesn't mean that every building is going to become completely new or repurposed. There would be the option that an outcome with an option 3 could be to simply strengthen some of the buildings, but do some works to other buildings to repurpose them.
So conversely, if we went with option 1, which was to strengthen, say take Te Manawa as an example, clearly that building, if we were going to do work on it, you wouldn't leave it as is, you wouldn't just strengthen what's there. So would option 1 restrict the potential for the development of something like Te Manawa?
I think with option 1, the primary focus of any work would be how you strengthen the existing buildings to meet code.
So in the case of Te Manawa, which is 8 single buildings combined in what might be described as a slightly dodgy way, option 1 would be strengthening those 8 individual buildings.
Yeah, and look, I think there might be opportunities for small enhancements to the building, but the primary focus would be to strengthen them. Bryce Hoskins may want to comment, possibly. Looked like he was grabbing the microphone.
Yeah, maybe to just add to that, Bryce Hosking, Acting Chief Infrastructure Officer. Essentially with option 1, we'd just be strengthening them in isolation for what they are for options 2 and 3. So all 3 options have all of our buildings being strengthened, but 2 and 3 are probably done with the context of a wider plan, as opposed to 1 that's just literally going, what do we need to do with Te Manawa, the library, COB, and dealing with them in isolation.
Thank you for those answers. I think that covers my main points, Mr Mayor, and I'd be happy to support the moving or seconding of option 3.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, and thanks, David. My first question relates to the April 2019 resolution that's outlined in option 3 on page 41. Now, a big part of that was to include the library and to include library options, and I haven't seen library options explained or explored in this paper. How would us progressing option 3, if we were to progress option 3, when and how would we find out what the library options were, and how would that be included?
Yes, so the 2019 work was undertaken at about this, well, was reaching its conclusion about the same time as we received information that the library was earthquake prone. So you're correct that the 2019 work didn't examine the library in any way, shape or form. So the 2022 work started to look at library options and costs, but obviously hasn't been advanced or completed. So that package of programs that we would put together for consideration as a part of the LTP would include examining the future of the library within the context of that 2019 master plan. So that but importantly, I think that 2019 master plan assumed that the library stays where it is and operates as it is, because the assumption was that it was not earthquake prone. So the short answer to your question is that work would be addressed as part of the programs that we would put up for the LTP.
Given that this paper seems to be quite silent on the library, do we need to be explicit about that, given that it is excluded in the 2019 CCPMP plan?
I think given, I think the images and the sort of spatial extent of that 2019 plan did look at the library in terms of its relationship of the library in George Street to the Civic and Cultural Precinct Master Plan. So I'm comfortable that I think the way the recommendations are crafted, and particularly that earlier recommendation, that the programs we would put together for the LTP would include looking at the library.
You're comfortable that that does include it in the, okay. Thank you. Excuse me. I have a few other questions, if that's okay, Mr. Mayor. 4.10 talks about resourcing proportionate to the scale of investment being enabled by the project. And the chart on page 46 gives some examples. What scale is being assumed, and is there any sort of resource estimate that we're looking at here?
We haven't done that detailed work to date, and if recommendation 3 passed, then we would develop those set of programs for consideration as part of the LTP, and that's the key reason why we have set the recommendations up the way we have, and that, as I said, effectively, we recognise this as a significant decision for council. And really what we're saying is we need, if you adopt recommendation 3, we'll spend some time looking at that set of programs, but you would still have the opportunity to closely look at those as part of the LTP. I guess the table at 4.8 indicates that if you are going to be spending significant sums of money from a capital perspective, typically you are having to spend reasonable sums of money to get that planning and design correct. So we're not saying that we'll be bringing back programs of 9 million or 5 million. That table is there to demonstrate that if you're spending in the order of 200, 300, 400, 500 million dollars, it makes sense to spend some time at the outset doing some good planning about what that is going to involve, and typically that costs can cost a reasonable sum of money.
Thank you. So in terms of the resources, it's also mentioned on at the top of page 42, under the outline of the option 3, under the financial part, it does talk about that option 3 will have increased cost and additional budget to implement, and that these costs can be considered as part of the 2024-34 LTP process. Will there be increased costs and additional budgets between now and the LTP to plan for this or put these programs together?
No, so staff would prepare those programs between now and the LTP, and that if the full set of recommendations are passed, those programs would be developed through the Civic and Cultural Precinct Steering Group.
Okay, and just
so there would be an oversight from that steering group between now and the LTP in terms of how those programs are put together.
Okay, when you say how those programs are put together, what programs specifically?
So there's a list. Where is it? So paragraph 3.3 on page 44 talks you through the sorts of things that those programs would need to be looking at. So,
Okay, can I just tease this out a little bit? I guess concept plan options, I guess perhaps I'll go back a step. The presentation we had this morning and perhaps other feedback that I've heard from people in the community have included ideas and scope that are outside of the draft that's in this paper, the 2019 draft, including different building configurations and different locations and different land use. As an example, what we heard this morning, but I've heard other feedback as well. If the steering group are to do further work in terms of concept plans and costings, would that be, what would be the assumption that would be based on? Would it just be based on the plans, the 2019 draft and master plan?
So the steering group won't be doing work on concepts and plans and costings. They'll be developing programs to undertake that work.
Okay.
So they'll be developing programs for the council to then consider for adoption as part of the LTP, and even if the council then adopted those as part of the LTP, they would be consulted on as part of that LTP to test whether or not that was something the council and the community really wanted to do.
So if those different ideas fall outside of this plan, would the opportunity to hear about those ideas not be till the LTP?
So there'd be two phases. So the recommendation is that option 3 is that 2019 forms the basis of the work going forward. So during the LTP, if there are a set of programs and there's consultations about options to advance the civic and cultural precinct master plan, those options would really be to do a master plan or not. I think you're likely to see the community come forward as part of the LTP and talk about A, whether they think it's a good idea to do a master plan, and B, what might be in that master plan. But it wouldn't be until those programs are approved, if they were approved as part of the LTP, that we would then engage with the likes of Walter or Mana Whenua or other people about advancing the master plan.
Perhaps I could just add to that, Councillor. So, for example, we've said in the report that community consultation and stakeholder engagement was something we didn't do well last time, and that potentially one of the programs will be a program that looks at a 12-month piece of work around that engagement. And I would have thought if that's one of the programs that we develop, then that particular program will be in place to sort of capture those views that you've just talked about and make sure that they're considered.
Okay.
Sorry, just to clarify, because I'm sensing there's still an element of misunderstanding. So really, if you went with option 3, the phases of the work would be this. We would develop programs that would be done by officers. There would be consultation as part of the LTP on those programs, but there would also be consultation as part of the LTP about not doing a master plan. If the council then chose, in adopting the LTP, to approve those programs, then we would deliver those programs over a period of 2 to 3 to 4 years to develop the master plan.
Okay. I think,
Any other questions, Councillor?
Yeah.
I've got a whole line of people.
yep, sorry. Just final question. So approving option 3 today would not restrict our options going forward. Is that am I correct to understand that?
In effect, in adopting option 3 in the recommendations, really what you're doing is identifying a preferred option or preferred package of programs to go into the LTP. So as you'll know, until such time as an LTP is adopted or programs are confirmed, nothing is decided. So really you're setting a path between now and the next LTP, but the council would be within its right, when it's considering the LTP, to decide to not complete a civic and cultural precinct master plan if the overwhelming response from the community was just strengthen the buildings, we don't need a civic and cultural precinct master plan. So it's effectively an initial signal towards the preferred option in the LTP.
Okay. Just one follow-up question from that, if that's okay, Mr Mayor.
Very quickly.
Given that, wouldn't it be premature for us to be setting up the steering group now if the LTP outcome could be that we don't progress the master plan?
Well, the steering group between now and the next LTP would focus on the programs that are prepared for consideration in the LTP, not delivery of those programs.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
I was just settling in. Thanks, David and Jono. My questions are about the library and how the decisions we might make today could impact on the library. So, for various reasons, this piece of work is being delayed, and from the read of this paper, it's, as I think you said, the LTP programs will be developed over 3 to 5 years. So, at the very start of this piece of work, we were aware that the library needed significant upgrades around, just from memory, the HVAC and the roof and various other things. And my concern is, if we're going down this track of including the library in the civic and cultural master plan, which I don't disagree with, are we putting those significant maintenance issues of the library on hold? Or what's happening, I suppose, is the question there.
Yeah, probably a question for me. Acting Chief Infrastructure Officer Bryce Hosking. So in June, we'll be bringing a paper with a prioritisation or proposed prioritisation of all of our seismic buildings and what order we need to do them in. And any sort of larger renewal works that haven't been done. So in terms of the library, we'll continue to spend maintenance on it and we'll do some minor renewals, but any significant investments obviously factor into that greater seismic discussion, and depending on when the library was going to be done, it determines whether and when we would do those works as well, or whether we in some cases might even do them as part of the seismic work. So depending on the decision today, that will need to be a consideration, and it will be a consideration as part of the proposed order of things. And when we look at something like the library as a test case, that needs to factor into the thinking of exactly what year we'd be looking to do that in the LTP, whether it be year 3 or 4, or whether it be later, depending on, as I said, really the intention of the other decisions you make today.
Well, if I could just follow up with you, Bryce, through the chair. I'm aware that the library roof is leaking right now. So I have a concern if it could be another 3 or 4 years before we can do the, and I think it would be significant piece of work to replace or repair the roof.
Yep.
If we go for option 3, is the potential for that work to be delayed still further? In other words, if we went for option 1, would we get that work done more quickly?
So what I would suggest, if you went for option 3 here today, in the paper that I would be bringing in June about the seismic program, depending on where the library was, so if the library was to be number 5 on the list and it wasn't going to be strengthened for another 6 years or so, at that point, we could make a decision to actually make some of those significant investments now anyway. So council could decide to replace the roof in the first year of the LTP, because actually the library wasn't going to be strengthened until year 7, and maybe we were happy with that kind of investment now. If the library was going to be strengthened in year 3, well then obviously the programs that come from this process would need to inform what the library was going to be doing as part of that. But maybe we wouldn't replace the roof if it was only 2 years away. So it probably comes down to that paper in June and today's decisions.
Okay, I understand that, and that sounds promising. Will the paper in June include reporting on the cost of replacing the roof and any other issues that I might not be aware of? Or is it only going to be focused on seismic?
It will be focused on seismic, but we will also be making a bit of a reference to, for any of our buildings that are earthquake prone, if they have some of these other works that are sort of tied to it or there or thereabouts, it'll be making a reference to those, and it'll give an indicative budget to what, or investment sum to what they would look like, as well as a bit of a reference towards what potentially the strengthening program could look like as well. So are we talking a $5 million strengthening or a $10 million one? So we'll look to provide information on that. It won't be a to the cent project cost to replace the roof, but it'll be able to give you an indication that it was going to be $1 million odd program.
Okay, so we don't need a separate paper on that? You feel that there'll be enough information in that we'll be able to make a decision?
Well, I hope so. There's no, I suppose the flow out of that paper in June could be that you could ask, or you could pass a resolution and ask me to go away and do that and come back with a separate report, but I would suggest that would be informed by the LTP, which is the logic of bringing the paper on the seismic thing in June. So as part of the LTP considerations, you can factor that program in and any of those other works.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Hapeta.
Thank you. Just two questions. Under option 1, when were those costings provided for the seismic strengthening? What year? Were they this year or were they 2 years ago, 3 years ago?
I'd probably just hand that over to Bryce. My understanding was I got those figures out of the LTP, but I'll leave Bryce to answer that.
Yeah, correct. Basically, they were used as, again, placeholder sums to inform the last LTP.
So are they 3 years old? So that
Let's say 3.5, maximum 4 years old, but because they were only placeholders, we won't know the exact cost of strengthening buildings until we do the detailed designs. So it was sort of only based on the information we had.
So they're not, oh no, there's a comment, I won't say that. Under 3.3, under project, where you're looking at the development of a project scope, David, will you be talking to staff that are in the library and maybe in Te Manawa and Square Edge about what they want in terms of users of the buildings going forward?
Yes, we would.
Has that been done to date?
Certainly the two phases of work that have been completed on the Civic and Cultural Precinct Master Plan to date, the key staff at the library and Te Manawa have been part of the stakeholder groups.
And Square Edge?
We have touched base with Square Edge as part of the 2022 work. One of the things we probably have to do as part of option 3 is actually just looking at the extent of the precinct as well, because there was some thought that it was odd that the Square Edge wasn't within the master plan area. So just to build on David's reply there also is when we, under 3.3, we talk about re-engagement with mana whenua internal and external stakeholders. So that program, which would be at least 12 months in duration, there would be an extensive piece of work within that program to also get into the detail around the needs of each individual activity across the precinct to make sure that if there are any opportunities for co-location, that we don't miss those.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, David and our officers. I believe we need a plan, but I don't like everything in the plan in front of us. At what point would you like us as elected members to provide feedback on the 2019 plan? Do you want us to make comment in saying, if we're voting for option 3, this is what we'd like to see, or will there be an opportunity to engage with that steering group reasonably early on in the process about what we may or may not want to see in those programs put forward?
Yeah. Just to clarify, I think what we're suggesting is 2019 would be the base to work forward from, and there would need to be further work on that. So, and again, the work between now and the LTP would only be on program development, so there would be no explicit work undertaken on advancing the master plan, looking at options, concepts. So that input from elected members would really be after the LTP.
So what I'm struggling with is why we would develop a series of programs without consulting with the community, with our staff and with our elected members. So let's say you have a program, one to strengthen the library, one to do Te Manawa and one to do the Rangatane Cultural Centre, and then the feedback comes back from elected members in the community that we want those all to be in one building or we want X, Y or Z, and we get told, well, we've already spent 150 grand developing these programs, therefore it's too late to do that. I'm just trying to understand why we would do the program development before the consultation.
So the program development is to do the work. So the program development is effectively preparing budgets to do the work. It's not doing the work.
Okay, so can you just give me an example of what a program would be? Would it just be called the CCMP program, or would it be called the program to redevelop the library? Like, is it siloed or is it holistic?
It would be a series of programs over a number of years, delivering on the items that are bullet pointed at paragraph 3.3. But there would be the opportunity for the Civic and Cultural Precinct Steering Group to provide input into that as part of the LTP preparation.
Okay. In terms of recommendation 5, does that only happen if we approve option 3? Would we not do that if we went with a different option?
If you approved option 1 or option 3, then you can approve recommendation 5 because the budget's not spent.
All right. Thank you. I'll leave the rest for comment.
Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. You'll be pleased I'm going to be very brief. So I just want to get a little bit more information about the intentions for the steering group, David. Perhaps just some commentary around timeline, the shape, makeup of that, any costs associated with that, and perhaps the process for the establishment of that steering group.
So we would see that the terms of reference being, well, I guess the first thing is we'd see the terms of reference being reported back to the council for approval in terms of what are the terms of reference, the membership and the purpose of that group. I think there would be a need for that group to have a particular role between now and the LTP, and then that group would potentially take on a different role post the LTP. So it's effectively in council's hands as to how they see that steering group being established.
If I could just add to that, Councillor, also I think one of the messages we got from elected members regarding the 2022 work was that connection and that input into the process. And I think what the steering group does is try to sort of bridge that gap that was created when councillors felt that they hadn't had input or connection with the project 2022.
Thank you, that's reassuring, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In recommendation 5, you mentioned about reusing that budget for urban growth, 220,000. Can I just understand, there was a recent recommendation to do more scoping around the financial requirements so we could actually make a decision to invest more to advance the additional work. Can I just get an understanding when that was due, that report?
Yeah, so we've started work on that report, and that will come back to council when they're considering making their deliberations on the annual budget. So I think there's a meeting on the 31st of May. So our proposal is that report will come back to the 31st of May. I think the key thing is, Councillor Dennison, is that report will include some recommendations for the council to consider for next financial year.
Okay.
So year 3 of the LTP. Program 1949 sits in the current financial year and is unspent. So what we're saying is if council chose option 1 or 3 today, there'd be the ability between now and the end of the financial year to redirect that money into urban growth. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. One of the, in the 2019 proposal, there was a recommendation from council to bring back feedback on scope, the timelines with community consultation. Is that still part of your thinking that work would be done to bring it forward to council?
Yes, and I guess what we're saying is almost a doubling up of consultation in a way, or consultation and engagement. So when you look at the recommendations, what we're saying is before we even if you had adopted the recommendations today, before we even did any further work, that work would involve engagement and consultation, there would be a broader consultation process as part of the LTP about the Civic and Cultural Precinct as a whole. So there would actually be the capital C consultation, and then about the whole idea of the Civic and Cultural Precinct Master Plan, and then if after considering that and adopting the LTP, you approved those programs to do further work, then there would be further engagement and consultation in the development of the master plan itself.
Okay. And within that big C work, is there intention, before you even go into a working party from council, to actually engage with elected members and workshop? Is there any timeline that includes engagement with elected members? Because my recollection, we had a workshop back from what was shown in the papers, 31st of May last year, and only one, which was basically a presentation, and only one other short workshop, which was basically direction setting of what was needed, and that gave direction to council to park it for now. Is there any intention to engage with elected members on?
There is, and that would occur through two forums, one being the recommended steering group, but also the programs that we're recommending would be developed as part of for consideration as part of the LTP. So like all the programs that you'll be considering as part of the LTP, we'll be having workshops during the course of this calendar year around the development of the LTP. So these would be just like any other program that the council is considering as part of that process. So just remembering the programs is not doing the work. The programs is preparing the budgets to do the work.
Okay. And my final question, Mr. Mayor, was really around those, the budgets. When ARUP presented back in May last year, they said that the financials were pending, and I don't see the additional information included in this report. Did they come forward with the final option report, which included the feasibility modelling and actually putting some dollars into their pre-work that they compiled?
No.
So we got no financials from ARUP?
Not to that extent, no, because we closed down that part of the contract after the post the August council workshop.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll look forward to comment.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, David and Jono. I just wanted to ask a quick question. Given the library, the state of the library's roof, and we know that the top floor's been closed to the public and it's leaking, I would assume that every day that it rains in particular, or when it's particularly windy, that it's just getting worse. When will we look at fixing that? Sorry, Bryce.
No, not a problem. Well, I guess it comes back to my answer to Councillor Johnson earlier, which perhaps I didn't articulate. So in that paper in June, you will be making a decision on when you would like the library to be strengthened. Depending on what that is alongside that decision, you can also make some decisions around whether you're willing to invest into things like a roof replacement prior to that, or whether you wanted to do it as part of the strengthening. And so the simple answer is it definitely wouldn't be until year one of the LTP, because we have no money next financial year, but you would be able to essentially set the tone for when you'd want that done as a result of that June paper.
Thank you, Bryce. I just wanted to ask, so there's no sort of contingency in repairs and maintenance that would cover that now?
So so to be clear, we do have some renewal budgets and we do have some maintenance budgets for the library, and we are, as I'm sure Linda will attest to, constantly doing work on the roof at the moment. Unfortunately, we've got to a space where the roof is coming to the end of its life, and no amount of maintenance will suddenly regurgitate the zombie, so to speak. So ultimately it now needs to be replaced. And so all really we're doing now is just patching up issues as they arise, really.
And in terms of with that, I'm just concerned about the health and safety for the staff who work in there and the people who go in there on a daily basis. It's not watertight. So what assurances do we have that they will be safe? Have we undertaken an audit, a risk and management audit around that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So we have done some work around health and safety, and for instance, the decision on the top floor to not be occupied permanently was was an example of an outcome from that. So basically it was an appropriate environment for the library staff to be occupying on a full-term basis. So we made it, as well as actually around exiting in an event, it literally has one way in, one way out. So we made the decision based on that to not occupy that floor. So that's a good example of when we are making these kind of decisions. In terms of the effect of the roof on staff, look, all I can say is it is an issue, and it's not an ideal environment, and it needs to be replaced. And I'm not going to say, I couldn't possibly say anything other than that. It really comes down to when council want it done.
Thank you, Bryce, and thank you, Mr Mayor.
So councillors, that's up to us. We can make that decision. We don't have to wait till June. We don't even have to wait till the year one. If we want to do it, we can do it, but we need some information. So probably not for discussion right now, but I'm with you on some of those comments. So, and I think we do need to deal with it. I don't think we can just leave it to year one. I think that's encouraging more damage and more heartache for residents and staff. So, but anyway, that's another issue. Okay, that's questions. Thanks, David. Thank you, Jono. You're released. Thank you. Right, councillors, the consideration for options to progress the Civic and Cultural Precinct Master Plan, and I'll speak to this in a moment, but and some reasons why I'm happy to move these is that council resolves approving option 3 is detailed in the report presented to the 1 March 23 council meeting, titled Consideration of Options to Progress Civic and Cultural Precinct Master Plan. Number 2, that council direct the chief executive to prepare a set of programs to be considered by council for inclusion in the 10-year plan 24 to 34 to support option 3 is detailed in the report presented on 1 March council meeting, titled Consideration of Options to Progress Civic and Cultural Precinct Master Plan. Number 3.
I'm just going to change the date because it was presented today.
Okay. Okay, number 3 is that council direct the chief executive to include 3 options detailed in the report presented on the 5th of April 23. Council meeting titled Consideration of Options to Progress Civic and Cultural Precinct Master Plan within consultation material prepared for the 24-34 LTP for consideration by council. Number 4, that council direct the chief executive to establish a Civic and Cultural Precinct steering group and prepare terms of reference to be approved by council. And number 5, that council approve the repurposing of program 1949 Civic and Cultural Precinct Master Plan to assist with advancing the urban growth district plan programs for the 22-23 financial year. So look, I'm happy to move those. Could I have a seconder? The Deputy Mayor, thank you. And look, colleagues, I've been the fiercest critic of this program for some time, but we do need a plan. It's just evident with the amount of questions that are coming forward. I think this program has had such a bad start. We're almost a lap behind. And I think the officers are really conscious of that. So in terms of it's got a bad brand, a bad rap, and let's just park that to one side. The work that was done, and I'd heard a lot of questions around it, let's be honest, was very poor. And it didn't, and I didn't vote for it, and a number of you didn't vote for it. It wasn't good. But we do need a plan. One thing's told me, if you want to make some really informed decisions, you've got to have some understanding of the data that informs those decisions, and you do need a plan of some sort. As close as yesterday, I did go back to the officers and the CE again to just understand exactly what they were going to do in this space, and that was what was articulated to us here today. The officers are aware that, it has caused some issues in the community. It wasn't well consulted. In fact, it wasn't consulted at all, and that brought some distrust to what was being brought to us. But I think that, again, they're mindful of that. We spoke about steering groups, and steering groups have really worked extremely well for council in the past, and they're a conduit about keeping not only us as councillors informed, but the wider community and partners. And examples of that are obviously the wastewater project, which went over 4 years, Arena, which had the ability to go massively over budget, and even Papiauia Place in the early days of what that was going to look like. And it's a safety net for us as well to keep connected to the project. If you're going to, if you want to plan, that's the way you're going to get external partners. And we've just heard a presentation from Walter earlier. And how do you get partners connected if there's no plan? And we're just strengthening a couple of ad hoc buildings. So I do think we've got to have something in place. Yes, there's going to be some further water go under the bridge in terms of what that actually looks like, what those what will actually end up on some sort of draft or concept plan. But we've got to start somewhere. If we don't, we will invariably not attract partners, and it will be lumbered totally on the ratepayer. So I hope that you will support this. Number 5, we know that there's a huge amount of work to do in the district plan, and we do know that we're running very low on budget for the officers to achieve that. So I'm more than happy to support that going into that important piece of work, and that's around Kakitangiata and other pieces of work that need to be done. So I hope you do support these. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'm happy to support the recommendations that we've got in front of us, and I'll just briefly speak to those. And I've brought forward an additional recommendation with the support of the Deputy Mayor. So in terms of the recommendations that we have in front of us, I think that they are sensible and pragmatic, actually, given the process up until now. I did have concern about delaying things further in terms of how it would affect the library. And that's what my additional recommendation is around. But in terms of the precinct master plan, I think it's very sensible that we address this in-house. I think that our own staff have got a good understanding and sort of local knowledge about the ins and outs of the different needs in the community, much better, than external consultants. So I'm happy for it to be in-house, and I think the addition of a steering group to involve elected members is going to be helpful, and I think, as John said, provide that connection between elected members and staff, which was missing before. So I'm very happy with that. I particularly support the repurposing of the Programme 1949 into the Urban Growth District Plan Programme for this year, because we know that we're underdone in terms of providing that rezoning planning, and that's extremely important if we want to achieve some of our housing outcomes. In terms of the additional recommendation, it's that the CE bring back a programme to the annual budget consideration for replacing the roof of the City Library. And the reason that I've included it now is because I'm not quite sure with the timing of the report in June that Bryce was talking about, where that will fall in terms of the debate for the annual budget. And it would be better to have that in front of us when we're considering the annual budget than to get it a week later when we've already signed off the draft. So I just want to be really clear that I think enough is enough with the library roof. You know, we've sort of been living on a wing and a prayer for long enough. And it's time to draw a line in the sand and say we need to replace it. And that's the end of it. Thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. I agree with the Mayor that we absolutely need a plan going forward. And back in 2019, we also felt it was very important for us to talk to our community about that plan before endorsing it. And this paper does outline how the project pivoted away from Council's 2019 direction for a few years too many, really. And I acknowledge the work done by officers in putting this paper together to try and get that work back on track. We do need to progress that conversation with our community, and you know, hearing the presentation that was made in our public comment this morning highlights that there will be a range of ideas out in the community once we do open that conversation up. And I'm really looking forward to hearing some of those ideas. My hesitance along many parts of this journey has been, there's a tension, I guess, in when we talk to our community, how much work we do prior to that conversation and how much work we do following that conversation. And I do have some reassurance from the answers that the officers provided today that we can keep that broad and open so that we can genuinely consult. What I don't want, and I've said this before at this table, is to present the community with a baked cake. And so I think in the work that we do over the coming year, I think it's really important that that communication that goes out to our community, particularly when we consult during the LTP, which I do believe is the appropriate place for us to consult now that we've got to this point. I think it's really important that that conversation, whilst we might be presenting a draft proposal, it's important that we keep that conversation open to hearing new ideas and open to considering different land use, different building formations prior to us endorsing or agreeing to anything following that consultation. So I will be supporting these recommendations today. The fourth recommendation around the development of a steering group, I was also hesitant on, I guess just given the history over the last few years, that we didn't want the conversations that should happen at this table happening with a subgroup. And I will cautiously support this, but will be interested to ensure that the terms of reference for that steering group does ensure that the decision-making sits in this room. I have just heard the further recommendation made by Councillor Johnson and was just contemplating that prior to me rising. I am happy to support it, but I would propose a slight amendment that the information that comes back, I would seek whether the mover and seconder would be open to adjusting that to be repair/replace. Because I guess the caution I have with this sixth recommendation is that I don't want to spend a large amount of money on something that may then be pulled down a few years later or whatever. Depending on what the outcome is on the consultation of the master plan, I think we do need to have consideration of whether repairing or replacing is the most appropriate. I agree that there needs to be something addressed sooner rather than later, but replacement is perhaps narrowing it down more than I would like. If that's something the mover and seconder are happy to adjust to, otherwise I'd probably, otherwise.
Are you happy for me to respond to that? I mean, we're happy if you want to put repair or replace, and we'll see what the report says.
Thank you.
I suspect it will say replace.
I'm more comfortable with that, just to keep our options a little bit broader. So happy to support all six. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Barn.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm speaking in support of the recommendations in front of us, as I've been supportive of the recommendations on this most of the way along. In 2019, when we talked about this, I was impressed with the officers' work at the time. I remember that the feeling of seeing those initial design drawings that came forward and feeling like this was a real opportunity, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for our city. And as Mr Davis said this morning, possibly the best opportunity in a generation for our city to look at some of the issues and opportunities in our central city and think about how we redevelop there. I described it at the time as blue sky thinking. And then following that statement, the storm clouds rolled in, and we find ourselves a whole long-term plan cycle later than where we expected to be. And it's been well traversed already in comments that has been a difficult journey, where I think we've learned a great deal about our in-house capacity compared to external capacity sometimes. So I thank again the officers for their ongoing lifetime of work that has gone into the Civic and Cultural Precinct Master Plan, and I hopeful now that actually the blue skies are back and we can start to move forward again with the project that we all know at one level or another we need. And I think colleagues have expressed that idea of going, we know we need a plan. We're not entirely sure what that plan should do, where it might get us to, what might be in or out of it. But what we know is that we need a plan. We have seismic strengthening issues. We have buildings that are suffering from the lack of maintenance over the time while we've been making this decision. We have an opportunity to look strategically at a whole block of our central city, which is not an opportunity that many cities get outside of an emergency situation. And long may that be the case. I said in 2019, we've assumed that we have forever to make these decisions, and we don't know that that's true. If our experience of this year so far is anything, is that sometimes the decisions are taken out of our hands when Mother Nature chooses to flex. So let's step into this carefully, appropriately, with due diligence and taking our community with us. But let's step into it. Let's do it this time. Thank you.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, colleagues, for the discussion. I came into this with an open mind, unsure of where I would sort of fall on the decision. And I am happy to support option 3 going forward. We have to have a plan for this level of spending, and we all agree on that. My concern is that 2019, the plan that we had there, has a fair bit of good stuff in it, but it is already quite specific on what it looks at doing. It is quite specific on Te Manua being rebuilt in the location that it was, and yes, it gave us a few options of what that could look like, but it didn't look at the wider picture of opportunities for synergy between the library and Te Manua, between a Rangatane Cultural Centre and the library, between other uses of space in the central city. And so my concern, and what I'll flag now, is I don't want to stand here in a year's time and be told, well, it's too late to look at combining those options because we've already spent 150 grand developing these budget lines and these concept works, and therefore we need to go ahead and do what we've done here, or we'd be wasting the money that we've spent up until now. And that's where my concern lies about not having at least some rudimentary discussion of what we would like to see out of this, because 2019 was 4 years ago. Our city's changed, our plans changed, the world has changed, as Councillor Bowen was just discussing. So I really understand that we need to build the programs to then have the discussion, but I don't want our programs to prevent us from having an open discussion about what we can do in this space, and that is the fear that I have with going with this option. So I am cautiously going to support it, but I hope officers hear the view of elected members here that we would like to see more broad options than just what was put forward in 2019 considered. As for the library roof, I mean, I suspect, as officers already indicated, repairing is not going to be viable, but look, I'm happy to see, what the cost would be to repair it versus replacing it, so we can make that informed decision. So yeah, I'm happy to support it, but I look forward to the opportunity to discuss it further and potentially look at adding or taking out different options. Thank you.
Councillor Hapara.
Looks like we're just going down the line. Thank you, Mr Mayor. I will support all 6 and very happy that Councillor Johnson brought number 6 to the council table. Just a couple of quick comments from me. Really glad that the officers talked about the staff being consulted, but really want to make sure that they are part of the project scope when the scope is being developed, because I think it's really important that they are. Second part is the seismic strengthening. Scoping was done 4 years ago, and things have moved and will continue to move. So that work, just because I'm doing seismic strengthening on a building just right at the moment, it moves all the time. So those costings are going to continue to move, and they're going to move upwards. So we just need to make sure that we're fully aware of that. The costs that are put in front of us today are going to change what they're going to look like in 4 years' time. And so I'm fully supportive of all 6 recommendations going forward. Thank you.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I too arise with some reflections around the disappointment of getting to this point and getting nowhere fast. In fact, not even really having a clear way forward, because I believe, like Councillor Wood was proposing, that the city's changed in the 4 years that the first document issue was presented to us. And some of the reflections around the limited elected member engagement within it. Everyone else has got a say, but they've got no perspective of all the other demands that we have to consider as future investment and the financial reality of actually putting decisions to make these things happen. I think they've been ambitious, but through the roof. And when I think of the money we've invested to get to this point, and that also includes Te Manawa's TM25 big dream of however many multi-million they ran off on, just to pull the reins back in and actually to pause and reflect that Mr. Mayor used the word, the ARIP, I think referencing that being a poor outcome. You know, I reflect back on that and actually how underwhelmed I was around how little did I know about it before they gave the big launch and already having the designs in place. Yet missing with the project brief the key components that was outlined about residential inner city living, and 2 of the 3 proposals missed that completely, and yet I thought that was agreed that that was a key part of any project being proposed. And also where they got away on themselves, in my view, this is again reflections around having a 550 to 600 seat banquet hall and you know, multi-storey commercial buildings like the Wynyard Precinct in Auckland. This was out of this world sort of stuff for what's showing as pressing needs around our city. And so I just thought completely off track. And so, and then lastly, as we were inquiring about the questions, the promise saying that the financial feasibility modelling was pending and near, and then still not deliver on it. I just like, that was one of the fundamentals I would have thought in the scope of engaging with them, to deliver something that had dollars in front of it, not just a whole lot of beautiful narrative and sort of concept designs. So disappointed on that engagement. So I hope I've reflected that in that fair way. And so the things I want to emphasise, I think we need to get this in front of elected members before we go down a rabbit hole of this is the design, we're going to go with it. Because even the 2019 model's got some grandiose ideas around rebuilding, knocking down the current convention centre and building another one, new art and museum facilities, hotels and car parking and accommodation. And to think that we're going to do all that at once, because the accommodation sitting where Te Manawa is, where do we build Te Manawa? And if we knock down the convention centre, how do we build a new one? And it's just like, it's going to be a year of like 20-year planning of a construction zone with, you know, limited access and parking and noise, and then put the dollar figures to this. This is like going to be the billion-dollar budgets that we're going to be talking about when it gets presented to us. So I just need to pull it back, that here we are talking about we can't even get the library roof repaired over the last 4 years because of this, and then we haven't even got the figures of what a new convention centre costs and what a new car park and a new hotel complex and a new accommodation precinct and a Te Manawa upgrade, and let alone the earthquake strengthening. I just think the financial reality is one of the main points we need to consider, and yet it's been missing along the whole narrative to this point. So until we get some of that in perspective, I think we're losing our way completely. So, yeah, so I'll support these recommendations, but with the intent of inquiry, of pushing for engagement with elected members. And that's more deeply and more widely than just putting a working group in place. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Finlay.
Well, I listened to Councillor Dennison, and he almost took my thunder. Over the years, we have had some great and dramatic plans given to us. We had containers that were going to be the Te Manawa, that were going to cost us millions and millions of dollars. We've spent money on plans here and money's on plans there, and they've all been thrown into the whaanga. We have to have a plan, I accept that, and we have to have a realistic plan. One of the things we have to remember, we're not Auckland, we're not Christchurch, we're a city of under 100,000 ratepayers. We've got to be realistic. When we have a plan, let's make sure the plan is for a city of around 100,000 people, not 1 million people. Let's keep our feet on the ground and be a bit wiser. So I'll support this, but tentatively, I'm not going to give 100% support in the future until I can see it being realistic. And that's the bottom line. I think we just have to just work to our budget, eh? Be wise.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and colleagues. I would first indicate that I do have appetite for a fresh start here. It's very much needed. I won't attempt the full traverse that Councillor Dennison gave us, but would say that I concur with much of what's been said right around the table. A couple points that I did want to briefly touch on, though, just to highlight around this. The first is that it's really good to see locals really interested in this, and appreciate Mr. Davis coming in and bringing us some really interesting thoughts and images. I wouldn't say that I necessarily am at a point where I have a view on those, but I would say that it's really great to see citizens getting involved quite strongly in what is fundamental to the future of the heart of this city. So I really am glad to see that and hope that we see more of that in future. Comment around the repurposing of Program 1949. Certainly very supportive of it, but it needs to be well recognized that that is but a small down payment on the actual needs in that space. And so we should not confuse ourselves with any sort of narrative that because we did a bit of repurposing in the budgets, somehow things are sufficiently resourced. The kind of scale that we need there will need ongoing investment and consideration. So small down payment. There are some learnings that I would reflect on, principally around procurement. And I think we've been in a conversation as a council about procurement now much more strongly than we have been perhaps 4 years ago. And firstly, the point of whether we need consultants in the first place and when it's appropriate to engage them. I think a bit like Councillor Broad in my first term, had a high level of skepticism around the value that consultants brought sometimes, and I think this might be one of those cases where he might like a word with us. And secondly, when we do go into these processes, making sure that we do have good opportunities for elected member input. And finally, to my colleagues to the left of me, at least spatially, around the roof. Around the roof. Very much happy to support the roof, but I would note that it is a prime candidate for solar and some energy resilience consideration there. I think, we're going to see some options brought back to us, but I think it would be nice to keep that within our frame of reference when we see that report come back to us. But happy to support the balance of recommendations here and appreciate this chance for a fresh start. Blue skies, let's go.
And finally, the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Tēnā koutou katoa. To the councillor on my right, not immediate right, but the next right. I'd just like to say I'm supportive also of solar energy being harnessed, and so I'll just put that out there. I think that and I've enjoyed listening to fellow councillors, and with each of you, there are things that I've really wholeheartedly agree with. I think there's a great opportunity for us to provide quality, future-proof facilities, and clearly we have to do it in a staged manner. I agree we need to be cognizant of the costs and realistic in what we're going to be putting up, and so support exactly what Councillor Dennison and Councillor Finlay had mentioned. I also concur with Councillor Naylor about the fact that we need to be cognizant about the authentic input of the wider community, and not presenting them with something that's already, I like that saying, with a baked cake, and then saying, now can you have input into what the ingredients will be? I think that elected members, the input should be substantive as well, you know, in the final decision making, but we don't want to be suddenly presented with something that it would be good to be kept in the loop at different stages, at the iterations. I'd like to acknowledge the staff because I know that they have a hard job and they work very hard. So I want to thank you, staff, officers, for that. But I think you've probably got enough to hear from all of us about that. So look, I am looking forward. I did enjoy hearing from Mr. Davis this morning, and ngā mihi kia koe. Thank you. Kia ora.
All right, thank you. We've gone right round the table, and that just purely happened by chance, so well done to the right and to the left. Look, just in summary, these CBD plans do work in other cities, or central city plans do work in other cities. Ironically, I'm in Tauranga next week, and I'm meeting the commissioners there and the CE, and I'm going to have a look at what they're doing there in Tauranga. Not that we want to have their transport issues, but they are doing some quite good work in the middle of their city. So, and look, the other thing, there's been a lot of talk about costs, and I'm a big one on this too, but we're not building all of this. We're a partner in this. Yes, we're probably a major partner in it because it is the civic and cultural precinct, but we're not building it all. So to attract partners, I stress you've got to have something there to show them. And that's how we got the post office development enticed and excited. Streets for People program actually was a big one, and they saw the work that had been done, and they could see that Palmerston North was investing in itself, and ultimately they looked a little bit further. So don't underestimate that urban design type work, which again I can be a little bit critical of at times too, but actually it is valuable too. I think having a wider plan will certainly attract other partners. So I'm hearing that we've probably got quite a lot of agreement going forward. Seismic strengthening, that was mentioned. I've just been to a couple of places where actually the cost has gone down because there has been other techniques used, other, dare I say, engineers and consultants. So it isn't always one-way traffic, but yes, there is a lot of cost increase as well. So I think drilling down on that and understanding who can do that sort of work, and perhaps from Christchurch as well, who have a lot of experience, is probably quite valuable. Finally, just to number 6, thank you to the Councillor Johnson and the Deputy Mayor. I too will support the library roof. I actually thought it was being done, to be really honest, and it just shows you that sometimes you do need to pull these things out and be quite specific that it is being done. So I've been over there, I've seen the waterfalls, they are happening. I just now would say, is the Regent being dealt with as well? Because it worries me that this is being missed. It is, okay, I'm getting nodding heads, so that's great. But anyway, please, if you can support this, it'll be great if we got this unanimous, so it's a challenge for you. We'll vote. All together. Ooh, good start, well done. 16 for, none against. Okay, we'll break back in the chamber at 11:15. Thank you. Right, kia ora tātou, welcome back. Right, where are we going? We're up to number 7, which again is another paper or report that's been from our earlier March meeting. So this is around the draft interim speed management plan and approval for consultation. Who's speaking to this? Peter. Welcome. Page 193 of your March papers, councillors.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Kia ora koutou. We have with me today Chris Slay, who's our Activities Manager for Transport, and Becky Young, who's from GHD, one of the consultants that helped us with this draft plan. We also have online Charlotte French, who is also from GHD. She's currently in Auckland at the moment, so she's coming in remotely. So the item before you today is to approve the draft interim speed management plan for public consultation. This is a very specific focus piece of work on school speed limits. To put that into context, compared to the piece of work that was brought to you 2 weeks ago, which was about the objectives and policies for the full SMP, this is a separate piece of work that's occurring in parallel on a slightly faster timeframe, so that we can meet the government target of having our schools covered by slower speed limits by June 2024. I'll take the report as read. Just to note, though, that the original report, which was on the 1 March Council agenda, had a different timeframe for consultation. Those dates, of course, have been updated, and I can provide those to you. But other than that, all the information in the report remains current, and happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you, Peter, and welcome to the others. I have a couple. So, and I've asked this several times, and I've got varying sort of answers. What is the absolute legal obligation of council? It seems like this is very much a master and servant sort of report, in the sense that why don't the government or Waka Kotahi just do this? Because we're just the local agent, is that right?
Not entirely. So the council is a road controlling authority, same as every other.
So we have a choice, do we?
No, not really.
Well, okay.
So we are a road controlling authority. We're responsible for setting speed limits on the roads under our control. Waka Kotahi is the road controlling authority for the state highways. We're obliged under the Land Transport Setting of Speed Limits rule to develop a speed management plan, and the government has set a target for speed limits around schools, 40% of them to be covered by June 2024 and 100% by December 2027. So this speed management plan is a proposal to reduce our speed limits to meet that target.
So my understanding is we've got, 46 schools here, and we've got 40 odd schools that are down to 40 Ks, is that right?
There's about 15 schools which are covered by the older 40-kilometre variable speed limit. Those speed limits don't comply with the new rule, though.
So the law, and I just want to check this, and I might need legal to, so it's now 30, it's not 40?
Correct.
Is that correct? Okay, all right. So also, where's the evidence, or, because I mean the devil's in the detail with some of these things, and there's 146 roads and streets that will be permanently 30 Ks. Why are we doing that?
Not entirely. There's 146 roads that are covered in this proposal. There's a mix of permanent and variable speed limits.
Well, there's only a couple that are not permanent.
Where we've used permanent speed limits has been on roads where they're primarily side roads off main arterial routes. We've used variable speed limits where the primary purpose of those roads is for the transport of vehicles and throughput, rather than for side streets.
So I'm sorry, Peter, you missed my question. Where's the evidence to say we need they all need to be 30 Ks at 6 a.m. in the morning and at 1 a.m. in the morning.
I might pass over to Charlotte for that one. She's a technical expert on that one.
She's not online.
Okay, Chris, do you want to take that one? Vicky?
Or is there any evidence? Or is it just a directive again from NZTA?
The 30 kilometres per hour is based on, I guess, the safe and appropriate speeds for local road environments. It's also about providing that safe environment for pedestrians and cyclists. So there is evidence around crashes with vehicles and the survivability rates with those other modes. It's much more survivable at 30 kilometres than, say, at 40 or 50. That's the general premise around the 30.
An additional point to that is variable speed limits have a higher infrastructure cost. One of the things we identified going through the 2013 speed limits review when we implemented variable speed limits there is that higher priority routes where there is a need for a variable speed limit can justify that cost, but putting a variable speed limit on 146 roads would have a significantly higher cost.
So talk me through what the higher costs would be.
Well, now that Charlotte's online, I'm going to pass that one to Charlotte. She's got the knowledge about the costs.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Apologies for dialing in a bit late. So the cost of a VSL is associated with the equipment, the installation, the management, the long-term maintenance costs. Ultimately, they can be upwards of 30k per sign, and also there is the ongoing ownership of who maintains that over time, who manages things in the future, and there's, I guess, the traffic management elements as well. So in terms of comparing it to a standard permanent sign, the difference is significant. I missed some of the earlier conversation, but this may have already been said, but where we choose to put variable speed limits, we also need to take into account electrification and the costs of linking into existing electricity sources, or if it's going to be solar, and potentially solar might not always be an option, depending on the sun exposure in that area. So there are a number of elements that can contribute to that cost that means we have to be we have to think very carefully about where we want to put those.
So, okay, look, I'll let some other people have questions. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In our consultation document that we've got here, we say the word government target a lot of times. Is it a target or is it a requirement?
So the target was set through the Road to Zero government road safety strategy. It's then been incorporated into the speed limits rule. So the requirement is for the council to have roads that comply with that requirement by June 2024 and December 2027.
So under the section, why is council reducing speed limits? Why do we not say that?
If we haven't, we can make that clearer.
That would be appreciated, thank you. How many accidents have we had in these areas around school zones over the last 5, 10? Do we have any data on that, of what the actual size of the problem is?
We do have data. Becky's probably the best person to answer that question.
I might pass it on to Charlotte.
No, that's quite all right. So we do have data. The crash analysis that we do right at the start of this process is identifying the severity of crashes that are occurring, where they're occurring, and then also looking at whether or not so much as speed was a contributing factor, because a key element of speed management is acknowledging that the cause of the crash may not always be speed, but speed will always be the reason for the outcome being as severe as it may be. So something we look at in our crash analysis is whether or not the crashes are fatals or serious, and particularly if they're involving pedestrians and at where those might be occurring. So our crash analysis honed in on some schools, and they honed in on, all of the schools. We did a bit of an analysis assessing where some hotspots were. Apologies, I can't recall the exact data straight off the top of my head, but we have done some consultation graphics which does illustrate this, which will be made available on the website during consultation. And what it's trying to do is tell the story as where this risk is, where speed reduction can potentially improve this risk of reducing those severe and fatal crashes that are occurring. Once again, I'm sorry, I can't recall the exact numbers off the top of my head. From recollection, there is a higher number of what we call vulnerable road user crashes outside schools, particularly in peak hours, and those are crashes with cyclists, pedestrians, and the likes of just people crossing the road, et cetera, Those are where we are seeing, particularly in those peak hours, which is when schools are usually out and about. So that was a bit of a trend we noticed. We do have more individual stats available, which will be made available during consultation.
Right, so we're looking at a consultation document here today to approve. You're telling me that there will be graphics in here explaining the size of the problem when we go out to consultation that we haven't seen to date.
Peter, you may want to clarify if they can be made available, but to my knowledge, they have been developed. Peter, did you want to clarify if they can be something that be included?
So in addition to the consultation document here, there'll be a range of graphics provided through social media and on our website. The consultation is proposing these changes. We don't put everything in terms of all the background information into the document here. Again, if there is specific information you would like us to include in there, we're happy to make those changes. If you think that's going to be useful, we can certainly do that.
And how would you like us to do that? Through recommendation or just through comment?
Through a recommendation is very clear, but if there's some specific elements, then we can take that on board.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Isabella.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you. I just want to, I'm referring to page 233. I had a question about the schools on rural state highways with high speed limits of over 70 kilometres an hour. The notes there say that there's no confirmed details or additional information from Waka Kotahi. Is that still the case, or have there been any updates since this report was written?
Unless Charlotte has any further information to add, my understanding is that Waka Kotahi's consultation on their interim plan hasn't progressed any further. We haven't received any new information. Charlotte may have access to new information than me, but I'm not sure. Charlotte, do you want to add anything?
The information that I have currently to date is that they're still working through consultation feedback and that they are still identifying where they may need to make changes internally. They are hoping to release a statement to local councils imminently, though, on updates on that program. But that is, that's all that I've been made aware of. I think the important thing to note is that we are very committed to working closely with Waka Kotahi on making sure that those schools that have that intersection between local roads and state highway go together so that it is a consistent story that is being given to the public in terms of when the speed changes are on the road. And we've certainly done the best that we can on local council side to take into account their intended changes and have provided feedback where we may disagree or where we think they could do more.
Great, thank you. So until that information's sort of forthcoming, we're consulting on assumptions for these particular schools?
Ultimately, yes. There's some uncertainty around the timing of theirs, so we need to move with this timeframe that we have available to us.
Yeah. Great, thank you very much. That's all, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I can understand Waka Kotahi are funding 51% of this project cost, but I don't see what the total project cost is. Like, must have some estimates.
Yep, Charlotte can answer that one.
Yes, so we have an approximate estimate of total cost of just over $1 million, and this is based on some very high level but detailed, which sounds a bit contradictory, I understand, but in terms of high level, I meant the costs are very high level as estimates, but the level of assessment of the design work has been quite detailed in terms of identifying what signs should be going where based on this preliminary proposal. So at the moment, it is sitting at about $1 million. That is taking into a healthy contingency due to the high level estimation. And it is based off this current proposal. If there are changes to be made, particularly an increase in variable speed limits, which may come as an outcome of consultation, then that cost could go up. And conversely, if there is a potential for more permanent speed limits, which may reduce the variables, then that cost may go down. So we are still very much in those early days, but yes, currently it is sitting at about that $1 million mark, and we hope to keep it around that.
Okay. And do we have our 500-odd thousand in our annual budget to meet this currently?
Yes, I can't remember exactly which program it was coming out of. It was either 279 local road improvements or 2119 the Road to Zero, but we have accounted for it in our existing programs.
Okay. And the current infrastructure that we got in around schools for the variable speeds, is that able to be used still? Or is that going to need to be
Some modifications are going to be needed. We've contacted the installed company, but I don't think they won't need a full replacement, essentially.
Okay, so even with that infrastructure in place prior to now, it's still going to be about $1 million. Okay.
Correct.
All right, thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. A couple of questions from me. The first one is that, if I recall correctly, when we originally introduced the variable speed limits around schools, there was a suggestion that it be 30 at that time, but there seemed to be a rule at that point which said you couldn't have 30 as a variable speed limit. If you wanted to make it variable, it had to be 40. Is that a correct recollection?
At the time, that was correct, yes.
But things have since changed, have they?
Correct, yeah.
So you could have 30 as a variable limit, as proposed for some of these ones here, without any problem.
So yeah, we're proposing the variable speed limits around schools where they are variable to be 30 kilometre per hour variable speed limits. As Chris mentioned, the existing signage can be repurposed with some modifications, but with the additional schools, there will be new signs required as well.
So the main reason then, or possibly the only reason for not having variable speed limits around all the schools is cost of installation of signage, is that right?
I'll let Charlotte answer that one in more detail, I think.
That is one of the factors, yes, you are correct. Cost is something we do consider. How I would like to stress that it is not the only factor. Something that we would like to strive for over a long period of time is trying to create a permanent speed limit on roads that reflect the desire to have that function and purpose of creating a safer community, safer places for kids to walk to school, et cetera, et cetera. So this is what's proposed as essentially that first preliminary stage in working towards those goals. And I fully acknowledge that those long-term goals may change over time, but this is essentially what we're looking at right now in this present time. And the reason for permanent changes, and we've prioritised them on streets where operating speeds are already low, typically already lower than 30 k's an hour, so we aren't actually changing anything on that day-to-day basis. Variable speed limits have certainly gone on where we feel that a permanent speed limit would be inappropriate at this time. And the intent is to try to create that consistent messaging so that when people are going into a permanent 30 zone, they're aware that this is because you're in a residential area where a school is present, and that is our thought process behind all this. So when we're trying to figure out if a variable speed limit, why we haven't gone with variable speed limits area, yes, cost is a factor of that, but also we're trying to create an element of credibility on our thought process of where variable speed limits should go, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. So, apart from putting a sign up, which I think we know is hard to change people's behaviour just by putting a sign up.
Yes.
Is there funding for any changes to road layout or traffic calming measures, or is it all reliant on just signage and then enforcement by police?
From an initial perspective, it would be signage, but we are working on programs, say, under Road to Zero, to put in things to support the lower speed limit. So these are programs around traffic calming, around school crossings, basically infrastructure to reduce speeds on our local roads to support the 30 Ks.
Sorry, I'm struggling to hear you a bit, Chris.
Sorry.
Could you just pull that a bit closer? So are those, did you say we've got other programs for those works?
So I guess under the same two programs, Road to Zero and so 2119 and 279, we've got projects in place to introduce traffic calming on local roads to support things like a 30K speed environment. We are currently working on the next LTP's program with Waka Takitahi to determine projects for the next LTP. So we are looking at still doing more treatments on our local road network to support the lower speed limits.
Okay, thank you. And then just my last question is, I'm not very clear, and others have asked the same sort of question, and I'm still not clear on the answer. If we approve this for consultation and residents disagree and are not happy with the lower speeds, do we have scope for not doing this? I mean, is this a genuine consultation, or are we, or are we actually so obligated to do this that it doesn't really matter what people say, it'll have to happen anyway? I'm not really clear on where that line is.
So I'll attempt an answer, and Charlotte may jump in with some additional information. So the government has set a very clear target that we're required to meet. It's around slower speed limits around schools. Where there's perhaps the greatest scope for input from the community and from elected members is around where those speed limits extend to. So you'll see in the maps in the consultation document, we've identified the roads that we think have the greatest benefit from a slower speed limit. The community may have some views as to the speed limit and suggest that it should be higher, or in some cases maybe lower. The scope for changing the actual speed limit is quite narrowly contained by the rule. So for a school which is a Category 1, which is most of our schools, the maximum speed limit is 30 kilometres per hour.
So do we need to put that in the consultation then? Because I don't think that's clear. I mean, it's not, it wasn't clear to me. and I suspect if we go out to consult with what we've got, a lot of people will semi-waste their time telling us that they think 30 is too low, when actually, then at the end of the day, we're going to come back and say, well, sorry, 30 is the maximum it can be.
We can definitely try and make that clearer. So we did have some FAQs in the document, and one of the questions was around, why are we making these so low? But if we need to make that clearer, then we can certainly achieve that.
I definitely think we need to say that 30 is the maximum that we would be allowed. So your options for consultation on this are around what roads it would apply to and the place on the road where it would start and finish, so that people are clear. Otherwise, it doesn't feel like a proper consultation. Thank you. Sorry, that did stray into comment, but anyway, the chair was otherwise engaged, so I got away with it.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Peter and Chris, and to our consultants. A couple of questions left for me. There has been a number of good questions already across from elected members. Firstly, trying to understand the variable speed limit end of that. Would that be restricted then to typical school hours, or is it gone right back to what are deemed to be pick-up and drop-off times? What does that actually, how's that defined, and is there flexibility around that definition?
I'll let Charlotte answer that one.
So The old rules, so the previous legislation that we were bound by with variable speed limits, I believe another councillor discussed that around the 40Ks earlier, was very prescriptive. There was very specific times. The new legislation has allowed for some flexibility, but this does come with, I guess you could call them caveats, in the sense that the operational systems of a variable speed limit, if we have too many varying speeds, speed times, becomes quite chaotic and very difficult for the public to remember, particularly when leaving side roads when we don't have the electronics, we just have the boards with the times printed. So there is certainly more flexibility, and that's part of the engagement and consultation process. We'll be discussing directly with the schools what their start and their preferred times are, and essentially working with them to come to the most appropriate time that fits within the operational bounds of what we can actually achieve comfortably without creating issues on the operational front, but also meeting the needs of the school, acknowledging that schools have varying start times and may have after-school care hours, etc. So there is certainly a lot more flexibility within this rule now to achieve that.
Great, thank you. Was interested too in terms of some of the maps that have been drawn for the consultation material. Is that in reference to the kind of walking and scootering catchments around schools, or kind of how much is that driven by kind of the demographic knowledge and the potential for people to take an active transport mode to that school?
Generally, yes. The scope of the roads that we've identified have followed a presumed walking or cycling catchment. There have been some modifications where the kind of the logic of it may not always make sense if you were to follow a strict rule. Charlotte or Becky may have some further information to add on that, but generally, yes, it's a walking or cycling catchment focus.
I guess I'll build on that. It goes, when we consider where to start and stop a speed limit, it is possibly the hardest part of this process, particularly when we're trying to keep it to quite small constrained areas in the first instance as we build a behaviour change. And when we look at the streets, there's a couple of things we take into account. We first look at whether or not the speed limits, speed that people are already travelling, the operating speeds, align to the reduced speed limit. If they do, then that's great. We then also look at the visual elements of, particularly around schools, we want people when they're driving along these roads to be able to see that, understand why there is a 30k change, particularly for the permanent speed limits when they're going to be per 30 at all times, even when the schools aren't operational. So we want to be, we really look to see, is there a visual cue to road users that this is why the 30k will change? And as Chris mentioned, at the initial stage, because we are constrained somewhat by budget, we are unable to install the infrastructure we typically would like to accompany in all cases. We are constrained to signs and lines, so we have been quite particular in picking where these start and stop. But what we are hoping to get from engagement and consultation is an understanding of, is this the right place based on how these roads are actually used? Perhaps there might be something that we're unaware of further down the road that might warrant that 30k being extended slightly, and those are all those juicy little bits of information that we can really make sure that the speed zone extent is fit for purpose. So that's at a high level the thought processes we go through.
Great, thank you. Final question is just around some of the support beyond council that would be needed to achieve the kind of speed outcomes that are envisaged here. We've had a couple questions already about traffic calming. Just wanted to get an indication of what support there might be for supporting enforcement if these were to come into effect, given at least my observation in this city is that there's very little enforcement of speed limits.
So speed limits, as you know, are enforced by the New Zealand Police. I'm not here to speak for the New Zealand Police, unfortunately, but this is a change that's not happening just in Palmerston North. This is happening around the country. So all local authorities are confronting the same issue. So these issues are going to be met by the New Zealand Police through their resourcing to the ability that they are able to. We're always able to have conversations and open a dialogue with the police to encourage enforcement, but beyond that, we don't have any ability to require them to take any further action.
So have we had any engagement with police to date as to whether they would be changing their enforcement approach in Palmerston North in the future?
Not directly, but they would be engaged through this consultation process.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
A couple of questions, and just touching on Councillor Johnson's question around this, if this goes through and it goes out to public consultation and we get a massive pushback, you know, and excuse me, and it might be around the permanency of some of the roads, what happens then?
So as with any consultation process, if there are suggestions from submitters to make changes, we'll prepare advice for you on whether those changes can be supported within the current proposal. There is always a scope for change, and as I mentioned, the extent of the speed limit areas can change. There could be some switch from permanent to variable, and we'll come back to you with the indicative costs where we're able to determine that. So there definitely is scope for making some adjustments to this through the consultation process.
Okay. And also, you commented that other TAs are all doing this. So can I get some confirmation that other cities and our TA neighbours are actually doing this work?
Absolutely. So within the region, the Horizons region, all the other local authorities are working through the same speed management plan process. They may be working to different timeframes, they may be working to different scale or scope, but they're all required to meet the same requirements that we are.
Okay. Why have they told me that they haven't been doing this work?
I can't answer that, but I do know, working with my colleagues at the other local authorities within the Horizons region, that they are all working on the same project.
All right, okay. Oh,
May I also add a layer to that? A number of the local authorities that I've been working with, I work with a number across the country on their speed management plans. A number, particularly in the central region, haven't yet quite got to talking to councils yet. So that may also be an impact as to why that hasn't trickled through yet, but it is happening imminently.
And their CEs?
I can't comment on that, sorry, I don't have that level of information.
Yeah, you may need to talk to the CEs as well, yeah. All right, Councillor Dennison.
Along your same lines, Mr Mayor, thank you. Just wanted to get the comment which is on page 202, which said, why is council reducing speed limits? And the Road to Zero is wanting to achieve at least 40% of schools across the country. And if we're looking to cover most schools around Palmerston North, that would, I just don't see how the funding works if we're not doing 40%, that everyone's doing 40%, that everyone's going to do it. It seems to me the budget might run out and some local authorities might not achieve any. Can I just understand the funding, because it's written in one of the risks around financial, is that if we don't do it all this year, there might not be more subsidy for more, and the requirement to do 40% and yet we're doing it all is the context for the question. So is this a multi-year funded project through Waka Kotahi?
So I'll answer the first part and I'll let either Chris or Charlotte answer the second part. So we're required to do 40% by June 2024 and 100% by December 2027. We've made the decision to go with 100% because we believe we can push this as an entire package with greater coherency to the community, so we're consulting on them once rather than multiple times. We had the ability to access the funding from Waka Kotahi in the upcoming financial year. So we're taking advantage of that rather than buying into perhaps more uncertainty beyond that year as to what funding is available. Whether there is funding available beyond those years, I can't speak to that. That's up to Waka Kotahi. But we believed it's probably a better approach to do this in one single step rather than do it over a number of years while we have certainty of that funding right now.
Okay.
I guess in terms of funding for this LTP and next LTP, Waka Kotahi came to us saying that funding is available to support the speed limits for this LTP. I guess when we're looking at next LTP, it's currently being in Waka Kotahi currently looking at developing that at the moment, but the projects that we put forward are not yet approved. It has to go through a delegations process on their side. So they'll be looking at, I guess, in terms of all road safety projects, how does it stack up in terms of value and I guess, death and serious injury savings per dollar. So I guess we're trying to take advantage of the fact that we do have funding available now, and rather than possibly falling short next LTP.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Do you think it would be more prudent to do this in stages so we can see what effect it's going to have on our city?
I'll pass that one to Charlotte.
It is certainly a strategy that can be looked into. It is something to be aware of. This is not all going to happen overnight. The proposal here is likely to take at least a year to implement and will be done in stage process within that year, potentially even longer, depending on a couple of external factors such as supply chain and contractor availability, etc. So that is, when it comes into being installed on the ground, it will actually be in an element of stages of when things happen. There is the option to potentially reduce scope and do it in 2 stages and move some schools into the next plan. But as we've discussed, there are potentially risks of losing the funding. There is risks of not having that coherent messaging because being able to do all schools in one go, the messaging is all the same for each school, and being able to have those conversations with every school at the same time allows us to not be seen. It means the ability to treat all schools as equal is there. It can be, I've worked with a couple of councils in the past which have had to prioritise schools of who they talk to first, and although that is something we can go down the path of, it does sometimes open up for some difficult conversations with schools who might not be on those lists. And we felt that for Palmy, with how close a lot of your schools are, it makes sense just to at least have the conversations all at the same time with consultation, and then the implementation will be staged just due to those limitations, construction.
Thank you, Charlotte. Mr Mayor.
That's right.
A couple of questions, final questions from me. Ministers come and go, GPSs come and go, Road to Zero programs may come and go. What happens if there is a change? Does the program, because you're talking about multiple years and possibly staging, what will happen if there is changes?
You're absolutely right. Nothing is certain, nothing is guaranteed. In terms of this program of work, we haven't had any indication that this could change with a change of government or a change of minister. The Road to Zero strategy has been in place for many years, and a lot of the work has been in train for a while now. So we haven't had anything to indicate or foreshadow to us that this is a program at risk of not being supported by any future government, which is why we believe it should proceed at this pace.
Okay. All right. Okay, thank you. That's no further questions. That's fine, thank you. Thank you, Charlotte, online as well. All right. So, councillors, we have a recommendation there. I'm not going to support it, so I have an alternative to put up. That is approving a draft interim speed management plan with all identified streets and roads as variable speed limits for public consultation. I think we're buying a fight for the government and agencies. The devil is in the detail, and we've seen that I don't think anybody lowering speed limits around schools is universally supported. And that's the real question. I think somebody mentioned, why aren't you staging this? If you did that, I think you'd get this through with 100% and resident support. But when you've got 140 plus roads and streets permanently closed to 30 kilometres at all times, I think we're going to get some feedback. And I can just point to some other consultation we've done in more recent times around parking, where we were buying an argument for, at that stage, officer advice. So I can't support this, and I'll be honest, the Road to Zero strategy is very controversial, and you just need to go further up the road to Hawke's Bay or down to the Wairarapa to see the mayhem that it's causing. And it's not universally supported by all government agencies either. So if the government want to do this, I think, or the agency, they should just do it, and I don't see why we should be buying the fight. So I won't be supporting the original, and I didn't see a lot of evidence to say that we should be permanently putting roads to 30 k's, round virtually affecting up to 15,000 residents. So that's my rationale behind it, and but I do think variable speed limits and the funding we're talking about is quite minimal, and dangling a bit of a carrot in front of us for a few $100,000 if we have to pay a little bit extra and look after all of our residents, then I think that's probably a price that's worthy of paying. Right, Councillor Naylor.
Mr Mayor, could we just ask for an officer comment on the proposed resolution, because this is not something we were able to ask questions for before. And specifically, it would be good to know if this was progressed, whether we would still attract the 51% funding from Waka Kotahi, and whether this would meet the requirements that are outlined under the risks in option 2.
Yeah, Peter.
So probably before I answer that question, Councillor, I'd like to clarify the intent of this motion. Are you intending to take out all the permanent speed limit proposals from the consultation document or replace them with variable speed limits?
A whole lot's variable.
A whole lot's variable. So the first question that arises then is the total cost. We don't have that information at hand because we hadn't prepared for that. But I would imagine, based on the cost for the number of variable speed limits that was included in the proposal, with the $1 million price tag, would be substantially more.
Thank you, that's useful, but my question was around, not around the cost, but whether it would attract the 51% funding from Waka Kotahi if we go down this route.
So for this current LTP, we've been approved for up to that $1 million mark. We're not approved to go beyond that. So effectively, we're subsidised 51% of that 1 million, which is about 500,000. If we were to go above that, at this stage, it will be fully council funded. Well, the amount above that is council funded unless we're able to get a special approval by Waka Kotahi to go above that. But and that's uncertain.
Okay, thank you. I'm happy to comment now if that's right. Or do you want to see if anyone else has got questions?
No, you're fine to comment, yeah.
Thank you for that. I won't be supporting this recommendation, and if it fails, I'm happy to propose that option 1 is progressed. I believe that there is some substantial evidence to support the reduction to 30 kilometres an hour, and I think it would be, I'd welcome that conversation with our community to get feedback on that. I think it's well articulated on page 202, those reasons. The second paragraph does outline those safety, the driver as being more safe, and that the harm from crashes has been increasing. And we've also heard that the harm, if someone is hit at someone driving 30 kilometres an hour, the damage is a lot less than if someone is driving 40 or 50. In addition to that, some of us had the benefit of listening to Dr. Rodney Tolley last week on slowing cities, and there's obviously, for those who heard him, he was very well acquainted with the many benefits of slowing down, which in addition to safety, he actually outlined many of the health benefits that would occur if we slow our city down, including some of the behavioural change. And that is outlined on the bottom paragraph, it's alluded to in the bottom paragraph of 202 here, where it talks about that children will feel safer and more inclined to walk or cycle to school. So this report doesn't outline what that might look like in the future, because we don't know exactly how many children would take that opportunity if they feel safer to walk or cycle to school. But what we are hearing from the experts who have researched this area for many years is that the cities where they've slowed down, the amount of children and adults walking and cycling is hugely more. So I think there's many reasons why I think there would be value in us having the conversation with our community. And I'm actually very comfortable with that happening as outlined in this paper. So just would like to indicate if this recommendation fails, I'll be supporting us consulting as outlined in the consultation document in this paper.
Councillor Wood.
Goodness, I thought there'd be other people in the queue. I was just going to make a few notes. I think the premise behind this is quite simple. I agree with you, Councillor Naylor. Lowering speed zones to 30 kilometres around schools when school children are there will make them safer. And that's what this will do, is when the school kids are there, we will reap those benefits of having slower speeds. But at 2 in the morning, when those children are not there, we are not going to have buy-in to this. People are going to travel through there at 50 kilometres an hour, whether we like it or not. We are not going to have police on every side road in the city near a school. So what we are doing here is making a cohesive strategy that people will be able to buy into, so that when children and at-risk people are travelling through those roads, it is slower, and when they're not, it is not slower. Because what we risk by permanently reducing it to 30 kilometres an hour is people just ignoring it outright. And that is not what any of us want. If we want the benefits, we need the buy-in. And so to get that buy-in, we need it to be realistic for people to be able to follow and understand. So I know, look, we're not going to get into anecdotal here, but I have confidence that people at 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. at night aren't going to be travelling at 30 kilometres through these streets. They're going to be travelling at 50. And so if you're travelling through it at 50 at 7 p.m. at night, you're probably going to ignore it at 7 or 9 a.m. in the morning. So what we want to do is get the best result for this work. And yes, it comes at an additional cost, and yes, our officers will need to look into what additional funding we might be able to access for that. But given we have to do this, all we are going to do is aggravate our community by permanently lowering streets for 24 hours to 30 kilometres. And I would much rather see us get that buy-in by having it there in the times that it is needed, rather than having it in there in the times that it is not needed. So that's why I'll be supporting this.
Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I, just like Councillor Naylor, I won't support this. There is a process, I think, which needs to be followed. And just a reminder, the first thing is that this is a nationally mandated requirement around Road to Zero. And if we don't comply, in future we won't have the ability to change speed limits, irrespective of emerging risks. There are some things in this proposal which I have some doubts about, in terms of variable speed limits on busy roads, and being able to, I suppose, delineate between what is described as school zones and other areas which would remain at 50 kilometres an hour. So I can see some of the issues in terms of implementation. However, we have some timelines in terms of us actually being able to progress this. And some of the comments made to date, particularly around this particular alternative resolution, really is trying to design this on the fly. So I think we need to follow due process. I have lots of experience of carnage on the road and lots of experience of where speed has been involved. And many of the people who I have attended to were vulnerable road users. So please, let's not get in front of ourselves. Let's follow a process, not design it on the fly, and just follow through as has been recommended. I will second it, Councillor Naylor, if this fails. Thank you.
Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I certainly will be supporting this alternate motion. honestly, I don't know where to start, because this whole unpoliceable plan, to me, is a bit ridiculous. I've seen traffic in the last 10 years in the city increasingly congested. Surely we've all noticed this. And with our population creeping up close to 100K, it will only get worse in the not too distant years to come. If you're in a hurry, you don't want to go near the hospital at certain times of the day, unless you're in an ambulance with the sirens going. Ask yourselves how many children have been hurt in the last 10 years in Palmerston North. To be honest, I can't recall too many. There's a little girl, aged 5 or 6, that was hit not too badly on Park Road a few years ago. She was with her brother, properly supervised. It probably wouldn't have happened. As you know, I see Palmerston North as a responsible city already. We already have 40K reduced speeds with flashing signs at lots of our schools. Yet here we are proposing in this nanny state we find ourselves in 2023 to reduce speeds at 45 schools, affecting 75 Ks on 146 of our roads to as low as 30 Ks 24/7. I think this is going to have problems with congestion, and slowing down our city will cost millions in lost productivity to our city's businesses, the livelihood and heartbeat of our city. Businesses are struggling already, and in case you haven't noticed, lots are dying every day all around us. So I don't see banging another nail in the coffin as the answer. As a councillor, I haven't had any say in any of these planned streets or reduced speeds, and to the best of my knowledge, no elected members have. I haven't been to any workshops, no discussions, and yet here we are, officers bring in the biggest change to our city's roading probably since we lost the Horton cart. So, I certainly will be supporting this, and I don't see 24/7 speeds as the answer. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Before commenting, I had a clarifying question. I had understood from the responses given by officers and consultants that there was a range of ways that variable speed limits could be interpreted in terms of time frames. They could be just pick-up drop-off times, or they could be kind of the whole kind of active time during the day. Does the mover, yourself, or the seconder have a clarification of what you're meaning by variable speed limits in this recommendation?
It's across all the other 140 plus roads as well. So they're not permanently 30. They're variable as well.
Yeah, no, understand that, and understand that you're looking for a uniform approach across the city. What I'm trying to understand is whether you're looking for the time to be constrained to just pick up and drop off time, or whether it's the entire school active time, say an 8 to 3 or 8 to 4.
I think let the experts look at that part. I mean, I don't think that really matters what's happening here. What are you seeking me to change?
Well, it leaves it quite open for interpretation as to whether it's either of those options, and if you guys are comfortable with it being that way. I just wanted to understand if you had a view one way or the other.
No, I don't really have a view. No.
Thank you. Good, firstly, to finally have the chance to start this discussion with the community. I think what we have in front of us then is the question of at what point do we start the discussion. My first reflection on this is that we, as a city, have set out a very consistent strategic direction for some time around livability, around road safety, and around transport choice. And we need to think about what sort of decisions we make that can best support achieving that over time. Unfortunately, we're in the position where our road safety statistics in particular are very, very poor. If you want to find the red ink in our quarterly reports, you can go back, come back, come back, come back, and consistently what we've had is challenges around achieving improvements in road safety. So my kind of first premise on this is around what we can do to ensure that we're making progress in that area. there's clearly arguments either way on this in terms of how you get community buy-in. Personally, I find it easier if I kind of know that I'm going into a zone that I don't have to check my watch on the way in or out of that zone to know whether or not I'm going to get potentially pinged for whatever speed I'm going. And as well, the arguments around keeping it uniform regardless of time of day or day, is that it does begin to create a more neighborhood environment, especially around our schools that already have streets that are predisposed towards neighborhood type environments, where we can return play to the streets, where we can return much more active use of those streets than we currently see, especially for active forms of transport. And we know that one of the main concerns that we have around active transport in this city is that speed, especially vehicles thundering by that weigh up to 50 tons, are quite a deterrent. And there's a pretty simple reason for that. The faster you go, the bigger the mess, and the heavier the vehicle, the bigger the mess as well. So I'm quite up for an approach that would see us moderate speeds consistently and look to ensure that we had, over time, the necessary infrastructure investment as well as the necessary enforcement support from our colleagues in the police force so that we could get good consistent use of environments at those lower speeds. So I'm sure we'll get feedback from community either way we go on this. My preference is that we start with the officer's proposal, which is option 1 as identified in the paper. So I'll be voting against this recommendation, but voting in support of the alternate.
Councillor Happer.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'll be voting for this recommendation in front of us, and my reasons are predominantly that I think that the feedback that we will receive if we go for the option that was put up by the officers is that I think we'll get quite a resounding negative feedback from our community to say that they don't want 30 kilometres across the whole city. So that's my main reason for that. I think having lower speed limits around schools is really important, but I think having it across the whole city, the way it has been suggested in the paper, has a real deterrent. And I think a lot of the community that we've got out there will be really concerned about that, and we'll get a lot of negative feedback about that. So that's why I'll be voting for this recommendation in front of us. Thank you.
Councillor Meehan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's pretty well been said. I haven't got a lot more to say about it. I will be supporting this, and the reason being I believe in moving things in small bites. I think we will get a lot of negative. We'll make good people, criminal people, by having it in permanently. If you've got a Sunday afternoon, a weekend, school holidays, where there isn't a lot of traffic around, why do we need to have 30 Ks? I understand what different ones are saying about if it's permanent, and you don't have to check your watch what time you're in there and all the rest of it. I understand that, and I agree with that. Some people are a bit robotic, and once they're programmed to do something, they just do it like that. So I do understand that, but I do believe we need to take small bites of this. We'll get a lot of negative feed, I believe, if we go hard out straight away. I think we need to go with this one and just take small bites. I don't see if it works, if the evidence comes up and proves it right, why we can't change it later. Thank you.
Councillor Dennison.
2 points to add to the debate, Mr. Mayor. One is, if we're going to go out and consult, I could see a mind to actually include both the variable speed limits and the interim speed limits and do the either or in the consultation. I don't necessarily see it being a one or the other. So that'd be one that I'd like to kind of add for the flavour. And secondly, I do actually have a leading weight for the variable speed limits, actually. We've got those in place now. And when you think of the school week, and it's is on average probably 3 hours a day that we're going to have the restrictions in place, and 15 hours a week out of our week of 168 hours is less than 10% of the time that there's high risk. And not to have the nature of having that requirement throughout the week when it's less than 10% of the heightened concern around the interface for that. So 2 points again, whether we just consult and get both options out there so people can give considered views, I think is wise, but then equally I think for 10% of the interface, this weights more in my favour. Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I won't be supporting this, and if it fails, I'll support the original proposal. The main reason, well, I guess I'll start by saying that this is a difficult issue, and I don't doubt that it will be unpopular. That's for sure. But having said that, I think it is important that we go out with our best advice, which we've received from the experts in this area, about what is the best option to keep people safe on the roads. Now, part of being on council is about sometimes providing leadership in areas that the public perhaps haven't quite got to that point yet. But we need to say, well, this is what the evidence is. And I mean, Mr Mayor, you asked about evidence earlier. There's so much evidence that shows that if you're hit by a car at 30, okay, that's a survivable event. If you're hit by a car at 50k, that's not a survivable event. And with cars getting bigger and bigger, children in particular are very, very vulnerable if hit by cars on the road. So I do think that there's plenty of evidence that says that speed is a killer and that children in particular are very vulnerable. And other members have commented that they're not aware of children being hit on the road. In my own neighbourhood, every few months, just on Highbury Avenue, a child was hit by a car until council put in the speed humps to reduce speed on Highbury Avenue. So I think we're all very well aware that there's plenty of incidents, unfortunately, where children are being hit and seriously injured or killed. And in terms of the variable speed limits, whilst I don't oppose them in particular, the problem is the cost, and that was the question that I asked around it. So, I mean, my back-of-the-envelope calculation here on this is that if we have 45 schools and 4 signs per school at $30,000 per sign, it would cost us $5.5 million. And if we have 140 roads that we want to put variable signs on, it would cost us $8 million. So, I mean, we don't have that kind of money to put variable speed signs on all of the roads. If the cost was different, I think it might be a different conversation. So I just think it's not going to be a cost-effective means of producing the reduction in speed. I'm not going to repeat the points made by Councillor Naylor and Councillor Hancock, which I agreed with, but there are other benefits to slowing down traffic, quite apart from safety. But primarily my concern around this is that yes, it may well be unpopular, and yes, we may well get back lots of people complaining, and that's fine, but we need to start the conversation somewhere. We can modify what we choose to do if we get a lot of negative feedback, but to sort of duck before we've even gone out, to not go out on what we think is the best option, I just don't think is the right thing to do, and so I won't be supporting this.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. A lot of what I was thinking has been said, so I'll try not to repeat. I'm interested to hear what our schools have to say about this, and concerned that if we accepted this resolution, we're narrowing the scope of that discussion before we've even started. I think good consultation goes out as widely as possible. We gather community feedback, recognising that yes, some of that might be negative. That would seem to me the basis for having a strong and positive engagement with our community. We bring it back here and then we make a decision based on all that evidence. I don't want to predispose what our communities might come back with. So on that basis alone, I wouldn't support narrowing the scope of consultation at this stage. I think for me this comes into 2 areas. One is the school conversation about what it takes to create that neighbourhood environment where people engage in multimodal forms of transport, and particularly that decision for school children to walk and cycle. And that comes down to a perception of safety. The officer talked about it. Perception of safety, as a parent who's walked their children to school, doesn't just happen about what you see between 8:30 and 9:30 in the morning and 2:30 and 3:30 in the afternoon. I might feel that the traffic is slowed at that time by the congestion often, but that doesn't tell me that that's going to be a safe environment to put children walking to and from school, whether that's supervised by an adult, supervised by another child, or walking independently. I think that perception of safety comes from that being a lower speed zone generally. And in the paper, I was encouraged to see that in lots of the school examples and those cluster examples particularly, the officer's guidance towards a lower speed limit was based on the existing average speed at the moment. Now, I didn't ask whether that was average only in the school time or average across 24 hours a day. I'm assuming that was average of everything. So those are already operating as lower speed environments. We're providing signals towards reinforcing that, but it's a very small behaviour change. But I'm interested to hear what our community think about that. I will push back slightly on the comments about this being across the whole city. I do accept that these are quite big, chunky areas, and the Mayor referenced 15,000 people affected by it, but these are focused on schools. So it's not the whole city, it's around schools. And I think I also see benefits for the 24/7 approach, potentially. And you don't have to have been around this table for very long to have heard the concerns that come to us around street racing, rat running, even South Street today, talking about the congestion in there. We know that there are issues around how our local roads are used. Sometimes the slower speed is a good thing. Congestion slows traffic down. It makes people make different choices, sometimes about their mode of transport or their route. But I'm not afraid of that conversation. I don't think we need to anticipate borrowing trouble on behalf of the government. I think we can take a step into this as inviting a conversation, seeing what our school communities and our wider community, bearing in mind not many of these are business zones, so I don't think we're killing business by doing it, and see what they think. And then we can decide to do variable or not. Whether we've got the money for that might be a different matter. But I won't support this. I will support the original recommendation. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too, Councillor Bowen, very much expressed what I was feeling and thinking. As a current teacher, I've been on many road patrols, and I've been getting increasingly concerned about people speeding around schools, and some people even getting pretty agitated when you say, well, indicate to them that the students or the children have to cross the road. We have that kind of thing to deal with. Road rage isn't unknown to us. We know what that's like. I think that if we're looking at a health and safety perspective, that's really important. And I think also consulting with the schools, it would be really pretty cool if we could ask the schools to ask the students, the children themselves, how they feel about the safety on the roads. They know. And they have different experiences as well. And some of them may be frightened when they have to cross a road. Some of them might feel that it's fine, you know, but we want to hear from them. But I won't support this. I will support the original. And I think that there are educative benefits also in this for all of us, for our society, our community. And sometimes slow is best. Kia ora.
Councillor Zabellan, you were in and out a couple of times.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too am just going to step outside the issue of whether or not slow speed is a good idea, because there is a large body of evidence. The OECD International Transport Forum have a really useful document outlining that in an international context. But I do find it frustrating to be weighing up whether or not we're consulting on what are compulsory changes when, especially as far as schools are concerned, when Waka Kotahi did a consultation last year and they are still sorting through the feedback from it. So I'm very wary about going up for consultation on a plan when some of those assumptions may well change. We don't know what's going to come out of the submissions that Waka Kotahi received, and it feels like we're pushing ahead quite hastily without the complete information, and that picture might change. However, I feel that there is a benefit in the consultation, particularly regarding those schools that are on state highways that wouldn't, that have different requirements to an urban school, which hasn't really come up in this conversation, which is why I jumped in at the end. Schools like Akautri School, Whakarongo, Turatea, this may be one of the only chances that they will get to actually influence for a slower speed in their area. And I feel that a variable speed limit somewhere on a state highway heading out to Akautri is likely to be very ineffective. I think people, if they're coming through at 70, they're not going to slow down at certain times of the day. In a place like that, a proper set speed limit would be more effective in my view. And I feel that although Waka Kotahi said they will be working with each school for the design and the safety aspects of it, there is a difference there between schools that are on urban roads that are under our influence and those that are under the state highway, which are not influenceable by us. And that's the pocket of information that we don't have yet. So in my mind, that blurs this issue a little bit. So if we're concerned about getting feedback of public saying 30 Ks isn't okay, I think that's not necessarily the entire picture that we'll get, because there are some schools and there are some areas who have been advocating for slower speeds for some time and are really looking forward to this opportunity to try and get some traction there. So I'll support the original, because I think the variable speed limits as a blanket rule doesn't meet the needs of some of our most vulnerable schools which are out on those state highways. And yeah, just still am really wary that the picture may change for us, and we might have to be rethinking this again once Waka Kotahi have finished sorting through their submissions and feedback. Thank you.
All right, thanks, councillors, and I appreciate your comments. Just on your comment there, councillor, I actually do think the variable speed limits will sort those schools out on those rural roads, which I totally agree with you. This is probably their only opportunity to have a decent conversation or hooey about it. I'm close to just about all the schools you mentioned, and yeah, I totally agree. They do need to be in the mix. Look, councillor, I'm just trying to be pragmatic here. You're buying yourselves very brave to be talking about these things at times, but you're going to buy yourself a big argument, and this isn't our plan actually. It's the government's, it's the agency's plan, because we don't really have any say in it at all, and it's been, I can see the pushback coming. But what are we actually trying to fix? I go past the 40k variable speed signs now at many schools, in fact, and I'll just question the officer's number of 15. I think there's more than 15, but I may be proved wrong, and I'd like you to check that, please, Peter, at some stage, in our city, because there's 46 schools. And I just struggle why. I think there's universal support for reduction of speed around a school, and I don't think anybody is saying we're not going to do that. And there was a couple of questions about evidence, and nobody's questioning that, and I think everybody, if we had a vote on that, would probably all be unanimous on that. It's the 24/7 aspect of the 146 streets and roads around it that will have the real issue. And I just think it's a total waste of resource. Government, our transport, council officers, and possibly police resource. I mean, Councillor Hancock and I know how stretched the police resource is at the moment, because we can't even get people sometimes to turn up to crimes. How are they going to turn up to giving a mobility scooter a ticket, because it could happen, or an electric scooter, because they might be breaking the speed limit? So, look, we've just got to be pragmatic here. Is this really, with everything we've got going on in our world, is this the best use and resource of our time? Is it the best use and resource of NZTA and our officers? I don't think so. So, look, I've done the math, but I'm very unhappy of being told what to do by another entity, and then we have to own that decision. It isn't our decision, it is the government's decision. If they want to do it, just do it. So if you can feel you can support this, because be careful what you wish for, we'll vote, please. It's 8-all. It's failed for lack of majority. Okay, so I'm definitely not moving the next one. So who's going to move that?
Oh, hang on, we need to move William's one first.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, there's another additional recommendation first.
A question, Mr Mayor. Bearing in mind that that just failed for lack of majority, what would be the position if this one failed for lack of majority?
This one here?
Oh, the next one.
You're meaning the...
Sorry, the alternative, the first motion. If we
Suppose
don't pass either option,
Yeah.
what happens?
We don't do anything. I'm quite happy with that. It's a good question. We're just trying to get some advice.
Well, we've been caught on this particular hook before, so if we need to move an alternative, then we...
Okay, if the option one fails, then officers would probably bring back another report which would possibly have options.
Mr Mayor, just as a point of process, during the debate, Councillor Naylor did give notice for an alternate recommendation, and I think that should go first as of right, rather than the alternate that was never flagged prior.
And I also indicated that I would second that. Thank you.
To be fair to Councillor Wood, he was in the queue first. It got presented to me first, so I mean I don't think it really matters. I mean we're going to have to, yeah. So I'm quite happy to for you, Councillor Wood, to speak to this, and we go from there.
Thank you. This is just quite straightforward. This isn't replacing the substantive. This is just adding to it, and I believe would have added regardless of whether option one went through or the one we just discussed. This is just in response to the questions that I asked the officers around why we're doing this, to make it clear to our community when they read the document what the history is, because all it says currently is the Road to Zero has a target of at least 40% schools being covered and doesn't go into the details of what regulations are actually requiring us to do that, because otherwise we open ourselves up to a whole lot of people just saying, well, then just don't meet the target. And we have to say, well, actually, we are required to meet those targets. So I also think it's important we give a bit of crash data analysis, because a lot of people aren't following the news and aren't following what's going on. And so to say, there have been X amount of crashes over the last 5 years above 30 kilometres in these school zones, or whatever it may be that it looks like, whatever analysis they've done that we haven't seen, I just think it would be useful for people to know when they're making this decision, because otherwise we'll also open ourselves up to comment of, well, I don't think there's a problem. So we have to show what the problem is, show why we're required to do it, and then go through the consultation. So yeah, I think this is quite straightforward, and I hope you support it.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. I'm not speaking to this, I'm speaking to the...
No, we'll do this one first, get out of the way, and then we'll come... Sorry, I'll come back to you. My
I'm
apologies.
happy to support this.
Okay. Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, sorry, Mr Mayor. Could perhaps the mover just like to add, why is the council consulting on reducing the speed limits? Just consulting be added in there, because we're not actually immediately saying that we're going to reduce the speed limits.
Apologies, that's the heading from page 202. So the heading is, why is the council reducing speed limits, ? And I was just indicating that's the section that this information could go under. That's just the wording the officers have given us.
Okay. All right. No further questions, or sorry, no further comments, so we will vote, please. It's passed 16 for, none against. Thank you. Right. Back to you, Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. I'd like to propose that we support the original recommendation that has been included in the paper. I don't want to repeat everything that was said in the previous debate, but I do want to say that there were some very good points made by both sides of the argument. The Mayor said that we needed to be pragmatic. I think this is a very pragmatic way forward, given that we need to open the conversation with our community. Councillor Bowen said that that conversation should start broad and that we shouldn't assume what our community will say. Councillor Dennison said that he would prefer to consult on both options. This actually gives that opportunity. Councillor Johnson said that we should follow the best advice from our officers and provide leadership. This gives us that opportunity. So I would encourage you to support this. Councillor Hancock also mentioned that he has seen some of the damage of out there, and personally I'm sad to say that I've also seen some of the damage out there during my time in the emergency department, and those are images that don't leave your mind. Particularly when faced with this kind of decision. So I'm really happy to open this conversation up with our community. I'm sure we will get robust debate and varied responses. I don't think it's our job to presume what that might look like at this point. I think our job is to ask our community the question and provide them the options and then listen to the feedback. So I think this is a very pragmatic and appropriate way forward.
Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I'm just going to say just a few words. Councillors, we can't ignore the facts, and we can't ignore the risks that our young people have every day that they make their way to school. This is just suggesting that we take the discussion to the community. And it is the community's voice in this that counts, not ours. So please, I urge you to support this. And it's like the TV ad with a fellow with his family pull up at the toll booth. How much is the toll today? Just the little one today. So please support this. Thank you.
Okay, right a reply, Councillor? Right. Okay, we'll vote. Thank you. And that has passed 12 votes for and 4 against. All right. We've got another big bit of work to go through in the next couple, so we might just break now for lunch and back in the chamber at 20 to 2. Thank you.